In 1408, a glass painter named John Thornton finished the largest window in England and was paid £56 for it. 311 panels of colored light, 1,600 square feet of it, built in 3 years flat. 6 centuries later, when York Minster took that same window down to save it, the bill came to £11.5 million and 92,400 hours of work. Same window, same glass. One of those numbers is what it costs to make the thing. The other is what it costs to merely keep it alive. Somewhere in the gap between them sits a small, hot, badly ventilated room with a lead-stained floor, and that room is the actual business. So, you want to own a medieval stained glass workshop. You have seen the fantasy. Blue light falling across a stone floor in long bars. Ruby red so deep it looks wet. 100 saints burning in a wall of glass while a congregation stands underneath with their mouths open, and you are the man who made it, the master, the one who signs the contract. That last part was real, incidentally. Thomas Glazier of Oxford genuinely dined with the warden and fellows of New College, and he put his own face into the Winchester College east window, which is about as close as the 14th century came to a signature. Dinner with the warden is not a business model. This is what owning a glass workshop looked like from the inside, the invoice, not the icon. Let's open one, buy the first sheet, and follow every penny in and out the door, because the most valuable thing in this workshop was never the glass. Walk into the shop you have just leased. It smells of hot lead and stale ale. The ale is not for you. It is for the table. That long slab down the middle of the room, painted over with whitewash, is where every window of your career will be born. And it gets scrubbed down with ale between jobs so the next design can be drawn on clean. Somebody at Westminster wrote the beer money into the accounts. It is a real line item. Around the walls, iron rods with notched ends, called grozing irons, for nibbling glass into shape a crumb at a time. A pot of ground jet for making paint. A twist of silver filings, which is a stupidly expensive way to turn glass yellow, and the only way anyone knew. A small kiln in the corner that will try to burn your building down at least twice. Here is what is not in the room. Glass. You do not make glass. People get this wrong about the trade, and it is the single most important line on your balance sheet. Glassmaking and window making were two separate professions. Furnaces lived out in the woods, near the fuel and the sand. You live in a city, near the money. As one historian of the trade puts it, the glazier was always once removed from the manufacture of his most important raw material. Strip it back and you are not an artisan with a magic material. You are a middleman with a paintbrush. You buy another man's product, cut it up, draw on it, fire it, and lead it back together. And the entire question of whether you eat this year is whether the thing you sell is worth more than the thing you bought. That sounds obvious. It will nearly break you anyway. Start cheap, since the cheap part is over quickly. Whitewash costs pennies. Shears, brushes, grozing irons, a mortar for grinding pigment, a soldering iron, and the lead tools. All of it is one-time money. All of it lasts your working life, and none of it is what ruins glaziers. Your kiln is a bigger problem, and not for the reason you would guess. The build cost is nothing. The neighbors are the cost. A workshop with a fire in it, sitting in a city of timber and thatch, is a public nuisance with a lease attached. Glass furnaces got complained about constantly, and centuries later the Crown was still banning wood-fired glassmaking outright. If you are working near a cathedral site, you may be handed a shed on the grounds instead. England's King's Glazier got exactly that, a glazier's logue inside Westminster Palace, 12 pence a day and a new gown every Christmas. Lead arrives by weight, in rods, and you pull it into the 8-shaped channels called cames that hold a window together. Lead is cheap. Lead is also poison, and you will spend 40 years bent over it in a room with one window and no chimney worth the name, breathing whatever comes off the solder pot. Nobody in 1350 entered that on a ledger. It was a cost regardless. Take on an apprentice. 7 years, indentured, and the guild permits you 1. 2 if you have no wife, which is a strange little clause, and the likeliest reading is that a wife was assumed to be working the shop already. Hire a journeyman when the work comes in. Exeter's records catch this arrangement in the act. A man called Master Walter was paid £4.10 for glazing the cathedral's high gable in 1304, and 7 years on he is still there, fitting a clerestory window with the help of 2 young apprentices. 1 master, 2 boys, 1 window at a time. That is the size of this business. The guild will also tell you how to run it. No working at night. No working outside your own house. Any journeyman arriving from another town has to prove he served a full apprenticeship before you can put him on the bench. Read those rules as a craftsman and they sound like quality control. Read them as an owner and they are a cap on how fast anybody can scale, which is exactly what the men who wrote them wanted. Running total, manageable, no worse than a good craftsman's savings. Now go and buy some glass, because this is where the floor gives way. England could make glass. England made a great deal of it. Down in the Weald, in Surrey and Sussex, around villages like Chiddingfold and Curdford, glasshouses had been running since at least the 1220s. There is a land grant from around 1225 to a man recorded simply as Lawrence the Glassmaker. Woodland for fuel, sand and bracken ash for the batch, and out of it comes forest glass, greenish, potash-based, perfectly serviceable. Perfectly serviceable is the problem. Forest glass is fine for a manor house window or a plain quarry lattice. It is useless for a virgin's robe. For color, everything arrives by sea. Rouen in Normandy supplies Exeter and York, while the Rhineland feeds the East Coast and Venice ships the expensive material into London. English fabric accounts name Burgundy, Hesse, Lorraine, Normandy, and Venice as sources, which is a genteel way of saying your inventory is scattered across 4 foreign jurisdictions and the English Channel. Cobalt makes your blue, and cobalt is a scarce mineral hauled out of the Saxon mountains at a price that put it in the same conversation as ultramarine. Copper gives red and green, manganese gives purple, iron gives you yellows and the greens you did not order. When you buy blue then, you are not buying a color, you are buying a batch. The next batch will not match. Any conservator who has worked on a medieval window can tell you which panels came off which boat. Stack the risks on top of that. Glass is fragile and it travels by cart and hull. War closes the channel, and there is a war running for most of the 14th and 15th centuries. A patron dies, his executors go quiet, and your Normandy order has already sailed. You are a small workshop carrying foreign inventory across a sea route through a war zone on the promise of a cathedral chapter that pays in installments. Remember the boat, it matters later. The crown eventually noticed the problem, for what little that was worth to anyone working in 1400. In 1567, a Frenchman named Jean Carré was handed a 21-year monopoly on making window glass in the Norman and Lorraine manner, on the explicit condition that he train Englishmen to do it. 2 centuries of import dependency solved by licensing a foreigner to teach the locals their own trade. You still have not seen what the glass itself costs. Here is the sentence that governs the English glazing trade, and it is a strange one. For most of this period, England could not make colored glass at all. Not made it badly. Did not do it. In 1449, Henry VI wanted color for Eton and for King's College, Cambridge, and had to import a man, John Utenham, out of Flanders, because in the king's own paperwork, the said art has never been used in England. A king, headhunting abroad for a color. From 1485, a London merchant's price list survives, and it lets you see in pennies exactly what that meant. English glass, 1 penny the foot. Dutch, 4.5. Venetian, 5. Normandy, 6. Do the arithmetic. The moment a patron asks for a saint instead of a lattice, your material cost multiplies by 6. Not 6%, 6 times over. And that is flat white being compared against flat white. The deep pot metal colors were sold by weight rather than by area, which is a merchant's way of telling you that you will not be able to predict this bill. Physicalize it. Take a modest church window, 40 square feet. In English white, that is 40 pence, 3 shillings and 4 pence, about a week's wages for a skilled man. In imported color, you are at 20 shillings before a single piece has been cut, and you have not yet paid a soul to touch it. One window's raw material now costs more than most people in that parish own outright. Then scale it. 40 square feet is a modest parish window. York Minster's 5 Sisters runs to 5 lancets, each of them over 53 feet tall, holding something north of 100,000 separate pieces of glass. Every one of those pieces was cut by hand, by a man being paid by the day, out of material that arrived by boat. One color on that list you cannot afford to use honestly. Hold on to that. Something strange sits in your payroll. One man on your bench earns double the man beside him, and to a visitor, they appear to be doing the same job. We know this precisely, since the building accounts for St. Stephen's Chapel at Westminster survive from 1350 to 1352, and they are the best wage document this trade produced. At the bottom, laborers and color grinders take 4 pence, 4.5 pence a day. The glaziers proper, the men cutting shapes and leading panels and doing the physical assembly, take 6. Glass painters, drawing faces onto glass with ground jet and firing them, take 7. Above all of them sit 5 men described as designing on the white tables, 12 pence a day. a full shilling. And over those 5, Master John de Chester at 7 shillings a week. Set that against the world outside your door. Around 1300, a common laborer was on roughly 2 pence a day, and even after the plague pushed rates up, a laborer in the 1390s was on about 3 1/4. Skilled trades in that same decade ran to 6 pence. Your designer then is paid 6 times a laborer and double your own glaziers. Not for cutting anything, not for touching the expensive material, for drawing. There is the whole cost stack. Imported material at 6 times the domestic price, a room full of lead, a 7-year training pipeline, and a payroll whose most expensive man produces no physical object at all. Which raises a fair question. How did anybody make money doing this? 2 documents answer that, and the first one is glorious. 1447, the Beauchamp Chapel at Warwick. The executors of the Earl of Warwick hire John Prude of Westminster Glazier, and the contract survives in full. Prude is bound to glaze the chapel, with glass beyond the seas and with no glass of England. The client is contractually banning the cheap stuff. The glass must be of the finest colors of blue, yellow, red, purple, sanguine, and violet. His rate, 2 shillings the foot, 24 pence. I want to be careful here, since it would be easy to turn that into a margin and the record will not carry one. The best plain imported glass on the London market a generation later went at 6 pence the foot. Prude's actual input cost is not recoverable from that, because the colored glass he was contractually forced to buy was priced by weight, and nobody wrote down what he paid for it. What we can say is the shape of the deal. He charged by the square foot for material he absorbed by the pound, and he had the standing to make that contract stick. Total on the job, 91 pounds, 1 shilling and 10 pence, with a further 13 pounds and change for extras, 91 pounds. At the laboring wage of Prude's own century, that single job is roughly 5,500 days of ordinary work. One man laboring every day of the year for 15 years, for one chapel. Exeter's contract is quieter and considerably more useful. Exeter, 1391. Robert Lyon is sworn in as the cathedral's glazier at 20 pence the foot for new work, plus 3 shillings and 4 pence a week for resetting the old glass, plus 2 shillings a week for his assistant. Read that structure again. He has a piece rate for the exciting work and a weekly retainer for maintenance. That is not a commission, that is a contract. Somebody worked out that a cathedral is not a customer who buys a window. It is a customer who buys a window and then needs it looked after for 400 years. Neither document explains the ordinary years, though. Prude's chapel is a once-a-decade job, and Lyon's retainer is 3 and 4 pence a week. Neither one tells you how a normal master in a normal town survives 20 years of normal trading. For that, look at what these men left behind in their wills. When a York glazier named John Petty died, his will listed, among the property, his scrolls. A Robert Preston left all my scrolls. Scrolls, rolls of drawings, the cartoons, full-size designs drawn once on that whitewashed table by the most expensive man in the building. That is the asset, and it is the only thing in the workshop that cost a fortune to make and nothing to make again. Do the arithmetic on a single scroll. A standing saint drawn full-size by your designer at 12 pence a day. Call it a fortnight of his time. 12 shillings. That is what the drawing costs you, once, ever. Now go and sell it. Lyon's Exeter rate was 20 pence the foot, so a modest 40-foot window comes to 3 pounds, 6 and 8. The first time you glaze that saint, 12 shillings of your own money is buried in the drawing. The second time, nothing. The third time, nothing. You are charging the same 3 pounds, 6 and 8 for a window whose design now costs you paper. 4 parishes, 1 scroll. 12 shillings spent in 1420, still earning in 1450, and none of those 4 congregations will ever stand in each other's churches to compare. This is why art historians can trace a single workshop's hand across churches 30 and 40 miles apart. It is not inspiration traveling, it is inventory. Once you see that the design library is the business, the rest of the ledger falls into place. Heraldry becomes obvious. Every gentleman with a new hall wants his arms in the window, and arms are geometry, a shield and a chevron and a beast. Fast, small, repeatable, priced like art. Small stained roundels for domestic windows were being turned out at close to industrial volume by the 1520s. Low value each, high volume, all of it running off patterns you already own. Repair work is the quiet annuity underneath everything. Hail and storms break glass, and lead itself goes soft and fails eventually whether anyone likes it or not. Every window you ever built is a future invoice, and the man who built it is the man they call. Then there's the work that is not glass at all. Look at Norwich, where the research shows glazing workshops also producing memorial brasses, painted screens, and wall paintings. Of course they did. Same designers, same drawings, different surface. Money in this trade was never made on the cathedral window. The cathedral window is the advertisement. The engine is a rack of drawings you already own, resold across 40 years to people who do not know each other. Red is the difficult color, and here is the trick in it. Copper-colored glass goes so dark, so fast, that a sheet of true pot metal ruby reads as black in a finished window. Physically, it is red. Optically, it is a hole. Glaziers called the workaround flashing. A glassmaker dips the blowing iron so that a thin skin of red sits on a body of clear glass, a film far thinner than the sheet it rides on. Held up to daylight, it glows. And because the color lives only on the surface, you can take an abrading tool and grind the red away in patterns. So one piece of glass shows red and white at once, with no lead line between them. Watch what that does to the ledger. Your most expensive colorant spread across several times the surface area in the only form anyone can actually see through. A cost saving and a quality improvement in the same move, which almost never happens in any business in any century. Masters knew exactly what they had. There is an Italian handbook writer, Antonio de Pisa, who goes out of his way to specify that if you want flashed ruby, you buy German. Prude went further at Warwick. He drilled holes into the glass and set colored jewels into them so the window would glitter, which is slow, difficult, and effectively impossible for a cheaper workshop to copy on a deadline. 24 pence the foot buys a technique your competitors do not have the hands for. Skill is the one input on your ledger that nobody can undercut you on, because it does not arrive by boat and it cannot be bought by the pound. It walks in every morning and it walks out every night, and if it stops walking in, you are a man with a table. Call that a good year in this trade. Reuse drawings underneath, a proprietary technique on top, and a patron with a dead relative to commemorate, which is roughly when the ground opens. Two things kill a glass workshop, and only one of them is the one you would guess. Plague arrives in 1348 and takes somewhere between 40 and 60% of the country. Your apprentice dies. Your painter dies. The mason cutting the tracery your window has to fit dies. Parliament panics, passing the Ordinance of Laborers in 1349 and the Statute in 1351, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague rates, which tells you precisely how far wages had already run. Jumps in labor cost of over 60% were not unusual. Add the war. Remember the boat. The channel is contested through most of the 100 Years' War, and your color sits on the wrong side of it. A workshop can survive all of that, though. Plague kills patrons too, and dead patrons need chantry chapels, and chantry chapels need windows. Grim arithmetic, but the order book fills. What actually ends the trade is the Reformation, and it does not end it for money reasons. It does not remove the customer's purse. It removes the customer's reason. A saint in a window stops being an aid to devotion and becomes an idol. And a business whose entire back catalog consists of saints in windows discovers that its design library, those scrolls, that priceless reusable asset, is now a rack of unusable paper. Nobody wants it. Nobody is legally permitted to want it. Then they came for the stock. In 1643, a Puritan named Richard Culmer climbed a ladder in Canterbury Cathedral and went at the royal window with a pike staff. That same winter, a Suffolk man called William Dowsing was commissioned by the Earl of Manchester to purge the churches of East Anglia, and he did it while keeping a ledger of his own. He wrote a journal. Roughly 100 parish churches in Cambridgeshire, around 150 in Suffolk. Glass smashed, images broken, every visit recorded in a neat hand with dates and place names. They called him Smasher Dowsing. As a business event, that is not a bad quarter. It is the physical destruction of 400 years of the industry's output, the collapse of its demand, and the obsolescence of its one reusable asset, all at once. There is no pivot available. The English figural glass trade does not decline gently, it stops. Should you have owned one? In a good year, you are a master with a chapel commission and a maintenance retainer running underneath it. At the Prude end of the market, that is a single contract worth £91, 5,500 days of ordinary labor, spread across a few years and a few workers. Even the unglamorous version pays. You are the man on 12 pence a day in a country that runs on 4. You own your house and your tools outright, and your scrolls sell the same saint to 4 parishes who will never compare notes. In a bad year, the cathedral's fabric fund runs dry mid-project, which happened constantly. St. Stephen's Chapel took over 60 years and 3 kings to finish. Your Normandy order is at the bottom of the channel or impounded in a war you had no opinion about. Your painter is dead, your apprentice has 3 years left to run, and the lead you have been breathing since you were 14 has started doing whatever it is that lead does. Here is the honest part, and I would rather not have to say it. We cannot show you the failures. Survivors are almost the whole of the surviving record. Thornton with his 60-year lease on a Coventry house. Thomas Glazier dining with the warden. Above all, Sir John Petty of York, Freeman Glazier in 1470, First Chamberlain by 1488, Sheriff by 1494, Alderman by 1504, and Lord Mayor of York in 1508, which is where the Sir comes from. A glass painter who ran an inn on the side took the highest civic office in the north of England and left 13 shillings and 4 pence to Furness Abbey because, in his own words, I have wrote my work there. Bankrupt glaziers left no wills worth proving, so they left no paper. When a trade's archive is built out of wills and freeman's rolls, you are reading a survivorship graph and calling it a history. Worth saying out loud. So who got rich? Not the men who bought the best glass. Prudy's client had to write "No Glass of England" into a legal contract precisely because glass quality was a thing you could specify and purchase. Anyone with money could buy it. Men who got rich owned the drawings. Which brings us back to the table, that long slab down the middle of the room, scrubbed with ale, the cheapest fixture you bought. Everything expensive in that workshop was consumed. The glass got cut. The lead got soldered. The apprentice grew up and left to compete with you. The table just kept holding the design. A stained glass workshop was never in the business of making windows. Windows were the delivery mechanism. It was in the business of drawing a saint once, correctly, and then selling that saint for the rest of your life to people who each believed they were commissioning something new. The glass was the invoice. The scroll was the estate. 92,000 hours to conserve one window at York. £56 to build it. That gap is not inflation. It is the difference between a craft that could repeat itself and a craft that has to be reconstructed from nothing, which is what you get when you smash the windows and burn the drawings and leave behind only the light. If you want the 10 rules that keep coming up across this whole series, the owner's ledger is free in the description. And if you want to know what happened to the men who bought the glass rather than the men who cut it, the medieval merchant is the next ledger we open. That one is on screen now.